One of my favorite things to photograph at the air show are the World War II Warbirds. The modern jets and demonstration teams are great, but there's just nothing that can compare to the raw power and nostalgia that the World War II Warbirds bring to the show. Typically, the last show of the air show season is Warbirds Over Monroe, North Carolina. And this year was no exception, and this year it did not disappoint. The air show itself is typically a mix of aerobatics and warbirds, but I mainly focused on the warbirds. Being that late in the air show season, typically early November, the lighting is mostly backlit throughout the day at that particular airport. The low angle of the sun makes for difficult shooting situations, but as the day progresses, the late afternoon light typically starts getting better for planes, especially when they're coming in from the left. Pyrotechnics are really cool to watch, but a lot of times they don't translate well into still photography. The angles rarely match up, especially when you're zoomed in to get good close-ups on the airplanes. They're typically either too far above or too far behind or ahead of where the pyrotechnics go off. They're still fun to watch. I only brought one camera combination to this air show, and that was my Z9 with the 180 to 600mm lens on it. I was shooting with the GoPro Hero 10 and a DJI Action 5 on the hot shoe for the video. With the GoPro style cameras, I used an ND8 neutral density filter to allow for a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second. Shooting at 30 frames per second, 1/60th of a second on the shutter speed allowed for a very nice propeller blur. And shooting any faster than that would have resulted in choppy looking propeller blades. TP-40 at the show this year was piloted by Tom Richard, who piloted two other aircraft during the show. Although I've never shot this plane in the air before, I have shot it on the ground at the American Dream Sky Ranch shootout in spring of 2024. For most photographs, I prefer to get the aircraft coming towards me or at an angle towards me. Rearward shots are typically not appealing to me unless there's something special about it, such as a jet aircraft with the afterburners lit, or if there's a fair amount of vapor, something of that sort. But for the most part, I typically prefer to have the aircraft coming in towards the box or in towards me. The P-51 Mustang, named Quicksilver, is piloted by Scott Yoke, also known as Scooter. I have photographed this plane several times since 2011. The main consideration when photographing warbirds or any propeller-driven aircraft are you need to maintain a slower shutter speed because you want that prop blur. A frozen prop just does not look good in a photograph. Obviously, that is up to the photographer's discretion and your personal taste. To me, a frozen prop, it makes the photo look fake, and it just doesn't look nice. Typically, anything below 1/500th of a second will start to show propeller blur. I prefer to be below 1/320th of a second down to 1/160th of a second. And when you start looking at 1/80th to 1/100th of a second, you can actually start to get, depending on the RPMs of the propeller, the full disc. But hand-holding, shooting from the ground with a long lens, those kinds of shutter speeds are very difficult to maintain and get a sharp image of the aircraft. The FG-1 Corsair was also piloted by Tom Richard. I've photographed this plane several times since 2011 in Charleston, including the Atlanta Air Show in 2023. Most of the still images in this video were shot at 1/250th of a second at f/13. I prefer a slower shutter speed for the prop blur and the motion blur of the background, especially on the low passes. But between the 180 to 600 millimeter lens, it was a fairly windy conditions. I was not getting the results that I wanted at slower shutter speeds. 1/250th of a second gave me a happy medium between getting a fair number of razor sharp images and an acceptable amount of blur. I don't get a chance to go to a lot of air shows throughout the season, so more practice may allow me to drop that shutter speed lower, and also maybe trying a lighter camera lens combination. I think over the off season I'm going to practice with my 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 with the 2x teleconverter and see if I can't get more clear shots with slower shutter speeds. I've also considered switching to a 100 to 400 millimeter lens or the 400 millimeter full-frame lens. When shooting air shows in general, having a clean sensor is paramount. Any amount of dust on your sensor will show up in the clear blue skies. It's easy to remove in post, but it can be time consuming and tedious. So the cleaner you start with your sensor, the easier it's going to be in post processing. Practice makes perfect when using slower shutter speeds and panning with aircraft, and the more you practice it, the better you will get. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more.